This table here, there's a lot of extra information in it. The first row is relevant because it talks about if a land use permit is required. We kept all the permitting standards the same. Then, as far as whether a conditional use permit is required, we've got all of those standards the same. But as far as Wisconsin Administrative Code, Chapter NR 151, and that, we removed those standards because we can't dictate or mandate that they have to comply, and that's a administrative code thing. Chapter 11, St. Croix County Code of Ordinances for animal waste storage facilities, that's going to apply regardless. It doesn't need to be in the table. And Natural Resource Conservation Service, NRCS Conservation Practice Standard Code 590 Nutrient Management, we struck that. That is underneath Chapter 11. That's part of our amendments there. And 318, short-term storage of animal waste and byproducts, that is also under Chapter 11. So it's just kind of duplicated. Any problems with removing those sections of the table? It just seemed like it was unnecessary. Every single one of them has on that the star too, so because it's automatically going to be required. Number 4, minimum parcel size for any livestock facility exceeding 199 animal units in the R1 or the R2 districts, and that is 10 acres. I should strike R2 because you can't exceed 200 animal units in the R2 district. Just a catch I just caught. Structure setbacks, the following structure setbacks shall apply, and we included manure processing facilities with this and other structures housing animal units in the A1, A2, R1, and R2 zoning districts. So everywhere above this, we allow livestock facilities in the R1 and the R2 districts, so that we thought that they should apply here, especially since there are more populated areas, generally speaking.
Jason, manure processing facilities, we had snippets of this conversation several times in the past couple of years. We've never really decided if we're going to allow them or not allow them. And is there another place where we talk about manure processing facilities? Because, one of the big issues was, can people import that? And that was one of the big
So that's part of it that we're going to be talking about just down below. So I'm in the current draft here. I'm not sure that's going to be in your packet when we get to that little chunk and that, because it's just something that Tim and I worked on in the last couple of days here.
Okay.
And that, but yes, we're trying to put in some standards for manure processing facilities in Chapter 15 here. That'll apply in all the towns. And then Chapter 11 will have some other requirements related to manure processing facilities as well to kind of double coverage it. So I'll get there shortly here.
Okay. So my question was, if we aren't going to allow them, then we can skip all of those. And that was a conversation, one of the last conversations, that not allow them at all, based, I think, on something that Ms. Dupree mentioned about how the people who run these and people who sell these are not very honest, and the amount of good that they actually do is limited, far less than what the advertisement says. Okay. So I guess maybe we should just put a hold on this if we go down farther and talk about that when we do.
Let's jump there right now.
Okay.
So this is just above the mobile tower sitting, and that, like I said, you probably won't have this in your ordinance and that, but manure processing facilities, some of the provisions that Tim and I were going over was all manure processing facilities must follow the conditional use permit requirements and submit necessary supporting documentation, including a nutrient management plan for any waste processed on site. So in other words, we're looking at where that waste is going to go and so they need to have the land base. If they're bringing in, that 200,000 tons, which is the first one that we had an application for, I believe, in Katy, then New Richmond, I believe it was 700,000 tons. They need a nutrient management plan with where all of that waste or all of that land can go. And so that's one provision. The numbers here are messed up, but all manure processing facilities shall provide 180 days of waste storage on site for both processed and unprocessed waste. And so what that is intended to do is to hold them to the same standard as a large dairy or a CAFO would be required. They're required to have 180 days of storage. I believe the applicants that you had seen only had a couple of days, if that, 3-4 days, I believe is what they were proposing. So this is a lagoon, this is some kind of a storage containment system. And then the other one is no processed waste from such facility shall be spread or applied to land with shallow bedrock or high groundwater. The separation of 3 feet shall be maintained between the application depth and seasonally saturated groundwater areas. And so that's the same separation that we would have for a private on-site sewer system. So that's where the 3 foot came from, is if it's supposedly enough to treat our human waste before it hits our groundwater, and so is it good enough? And so the application depth is mentioned in there. Yeah, between the application depth and seasonally saturated. So if they're knifing it in, you know, and that, they would need 4 feet probably minimum, and that to hit any seasonally saturated water.
An issue that pops up though is, that's fine where we aren't applying that above karst soil, karst ground, you know, which has fractures in, because that runs immediately down into the aquifer. So that has to be in there too. What's under the under, you know, there has to be something said about that.
Right, that's kind of where we were heading with the shallow bedrock. I mean, I can replace that with karst if you'd like.
Well, yeah, I think you should clarify that, so at least put in parentheses what you mean by that. Shallow bedrock might mean, you know, it's only 2 feet down, we have solid rock. But this is not solid rock, that's the issue. It's fractured. Yeah, it's fractured, right. And also in there, in this, there's nothing that says about where that product can come from, how far it can come from, what can be in that product, if it can be dead horses and dead chickens and all of that stuff, which was planned for the enrichment one. And can the manure come from all across Wisconsin, and then what are the chances it's going to be hauled back to all the parts of Wisconsin to do it? And yeah, if we're going to go with that, we have to, I think, make some rules where it's coming from and where it's going.
Can we legally say that when we're operating these types of facilities, that it has to be balanced, where it has to come within St. Croix County? We can't be taking things out of county and centralizing it to the county and then dispose of it?
I can run it past Heather, you know, and that, I don't know the answer to that question, if we could, you know, limit it on a geographical area, and that most of the time, anytime you have a zoning use, you have to allow some way to have it permitted, and you have to allow some location in the county that it could be potentially located. But that's kind of where the conditional use permit comes in, because you have the ability to condition the approval. And I know from, with Tim, is the storage is a big concern, and where the waste is going is a big concern. And that, are they mixing it with industrial waste, you know, and that is a big concern, and that's a provision.
To go back
A lot of this is regulated by the DNR as well, but.
To go back to that conversation about location, the concern when that was brought up in previous years, that I remember, was that if we were restricting it within St. Croix County, then we're basically saying that if a site was going to be located on the eastern side of the county, then, you know, they can't grab materials or whatever from Dunn County that's, you know, 5 miles down the street.
Sorry, I missed that, Supervisor Schroeder.
So are you shooting for something like a 10-mile radius of the facility or something like that?
I'm not sure what that answer, we were just talking, it was probably before you got here, Jason, was when we were talking about that before, was that, you know, the idea was to restrict it to St. Croix County, but if we're gonna have something in a western county, then they couldn't go across the line to use some from Dunn County. That doesn't make a lot of sense.
Okay, so something like all waste transported into the facility must originate within St. Croix County or within 10 miles of the facility, so something like that, is that, or you just want it to be St. Croix County?
I would say let's just keep it at St. Croix County for now. Let's just say St. Croix County. That's a safe way?
I know one of the concerns that I've heard expressed is even, because we're talking about the transportation of waste material, I mean, we're talking about heavy material, right, on our county roads in many cases. So, I mean, I would be comfortable even putting in like 20 miles, but 10 might feel a little constraining for people. I think we need to put up enough barriers so that company that wants to look at this recognizes that we're going to be serious about this, and we're going to be careful about our groundwater and what the community is like for the people that live here.
Yeah, we're kind of caught between a rock and a hard spot. You know, we want to keep our agricultural
Yeah.
attitude within the county, and this is part of that. So you know, we have to somehow blend those two and make everyone happy, and that's where the issue is. But I think by at least keeping it within St. Croix County, and if you use the road restrictions, you know, that should handle it.
And if we don't allow it within the towns that we're responsible for zoning, we're going to have issues like happened in Roberts, where they're trying to pressure them to put the project in the middle of, you know, an incorporated area, which is not ideal.
And Richmond must have fought that same battle, because that was in the industrial park, right, Scott?
Yeah, if there are options, you know, out in wide open spaces, it'll be less painful for the surrounding community, I guess.
And I think we should have some odor parameters also. I'm not sure how you rate smell, but they do for many different businesses. I'm certain there would be for that also.
I think, you know, and one of the things I just want to be really cautious of is that we don't want to run into a similar problem that they had over in Clark County, that Tim is well aware. He has got a good background, Tim Stuber, I forget how to pronounce his, Steve, how to pronounce his last name, I apologize, but anyway, the issue that with there, they've got so many people that have contaminated wells now, and contamination going into the river. And that contamination, from my understanding, could actually flow all the way in and contaminate Eau Claire's water supply in the future as this continues to propagate. And it's taking forever to try to get this thing cleaned up. That's the whole thing that we're trying to prevent with some of this, is we just don't want to be put in that position. Because they've got, it's mostly there, it's all rendered animals, and it's feet deep of these things, and the breakdown of the bioproducts is going down into the water tables.
Oh, that's a good one.
So I've added a few provisions. Sorry if I missed something in that as you guys were talking. But,
I think it looks like you caught them all.
and that, so I added the karst features in number 2, or sorry, it'd actually be number 3. Number 4, we added no industrial waste may be mixed with with the organic animal waste. No animals or animal parts may be processed in such facility. All waste transported into or processed at the facility must originate in St. Croix County. Facility must comply with Chapter 11 of the St. Croix County Code of Ordinances, including internal drainage and containment of the facility. including internal drainage and containment of runoff. Traffic must comply with seasonal weight restrictions. Manure processing facilities shall not be located within a wellhead protection area.
Might add in with number 3 in the industrial to, no industrial or biological. So you don't have hospital.
So we had, I think in the last work session, we talked about that, but that, any of the biopower facilities, according to the state statute, is biological waste, but we need an actual definition of what is included in biological waste, because the state doesn't do a great job at it. And if we don't define it, then
Okay, well, we got a good start, and so we'll have this in the next one, so I'm gonna scroll back up here and just kinda catch up. So, structure setbacks, all structures must be set back at least 100 feet from any property line or road right-of-way if the facility has less than 1,000 animal units. All structures must be set back 200 feet from any property line or 150 feet from the right-of-way if the facility has 1,000 animal units or more. So in other words, just a little bit of a break there. Then these first provisions here were kind of confusing, what the May 1st, 2006 date was for, and then provision, I'll call it 3 here, seemed like it was saying the same thing as the 1,000 animal units or less with a 100-foot setback. So, and then here, all animal waste storage. So this is not the barn, this is only the waste storage structures must be set back at least 350 feet from any property line or the nearest point of any public road right-of-way. And then unless the animal waste storage structure existed prior to May 1st, 2006. So that 350 feet, I believe that is a maximum, and that through the livestock citing administrative code. And then we added provision 6, minimum of 5 feet of vertical soil separation between bedrock and the water table or other limiting factors and storage facilities. That's important. The other ones kind of all saying the same thing. R1 and R2, we just brought that up here at the top. But now that I've seen that 500, or that 5 feet of separation, I'll change it in the manure processing facility to 5 as well so that it is the same. Any questions on those deletions? I think.
I would just ask, in addition, as a holding place, that has to do with the odor management and measurements. There are ways to measure that stuff, and I think we need to research it and figure it out, what we want in there.
Jason, do you know if that's 5 feet of soil, where to go? The minimum of 5 feet of vertical soil separation between bedrock and water table. Does that include again in karst, the karst situation, or must it be greater than that? I think, citing these is very, very important based on where they're at, what's below it.
So no facility is able to be, so no waste from such facility shall be spread or applied to land with shallow bedrock, karst features, or high groundwater. The separation of 5 feet shall be maintained between application depth and seasonally saturated groundwater areas. So
Okay.
that would be different. So they're not able to apply it where there is karst features. However, an area that's a low depression, that like a wetland kind of area or a seasonal wetland, they would still have to keep that 5 feet of separation.
Okay, but I'm down in a different place. I'm in number 6A6. I think you have to go the other way. Right above residential R1 and R2 district.
Okay.
Page 59 in mine, but your pages are different. Yeah, that right there.
Okay.
See, that's it says that on the other one, but on this one it doesn't, and we probably should. And I'm not sure if 5 feet is enough for that, but I know there are people in this building who do know. Maybe John knows. I'm not sure if 5 feet is enough, or it's got to be 12 feet, or if it's got to be 2 feet.
5 feet is usually quite a bit, so, yeah. And these are gonna be animal waste storage structures, which chapter 11 is gonna require them to have a liner and be leak-proof anyway, so, yep.
But I think that has to be noted, that that has to have a liner, because I would not have known that from reading this.
There's some language in here about it having to apply that has been added tonight, that it has to comply with chapter 11 also, so that they would know at least to look at chapter 11 like anyone who's reading it.
Yeah, we got her in there, so. All right.
All right, instead of continuing, Supervisor Connor had some thoughts or questions on some of the stuff we went through last time, so let's spend a couple minutes on that, and then I think call it a night.
Thank you. So at the very beginning of this unit, they talk about both the different kinds of units or different sections, and they talk about they named off some of the overlay districts. It's right towards the very beginning, but there was three other overlay districts that some of them we've talked about before and some not. One of them was consideration of identifying solid waste facilities that have been abandoned, old town junkyards, and the reason behind that was because of the water well setback requirements from the DNR, and being made aware that there could be potential for chemical contaminations and different things in those areas. So it was just identifying where those all are in the county. Another one that we have is we actually have a considerable amount of privately owned and operated air runways that are field runways. I know of 3 of them just in my district. And one of the issues with that, again, is that the FAA has, well, for one thing, these have a lot of authority once they've been established. And it means a lot with the FAA regulations for what the maximum heights that can be built around these, and the types of lighting and the parameter, and then there's height restrictions from how close you are to the runway, kind of at an angle going up. And there's restrictions on development that you can't develop off the end of the runways. So somebody that wants to build a house, and if there's a field runway up behind it, they may be restricted that they can't build there. So again, it would be another potential for a setback overlay for air through the FAA regulations. Another one I had was for stormwater overlay, and This one, I kind of talked to Jason briefly on, and it's something I wanted to talk to you as the committee on, is currently for the last like 25 years, is as far back that the state has required that whenever you put in a new development, that you have to balance the stormwater, that it is contained for at least a 100-year storm event on the property. And in doing that, all of these new plats and everything come in, they're all set up that way. Where the problem lies is that they're typically done two ways right now for the long-term maintenance of these. One is that they create a homeowners association, and the homeowners association is tasked with, they have to maintain these as time goes on. The other method is that they don't do anything, and they end up where if that stormwater retention pond's on your property, you're the guy. Unfortunately, with both of these is they don't really give direction on how to maintain these and take care of them for the future. And it can become quite burdensome because a lot of the associations, when they have to do these maintenance issues, they get into fights over it and nobody wants to pay for it. And so they make it so that it becomes a legal fiasco to try to fix the problems. And a lot of times and we end up being involved anyway over these issues because we're the ones that have to be the bad news bearers that, hey, this is messed up, you're responsible, take care of it. And you get the other guy that, with the issues where, well, the whole stormwater pond's on his property, but it's all the neighbors' flow, cross flow that's got all the silt and sediment coming in, and he's all of a sudden liable for everybody else's stuff. So the thought behind this is to create potentially overlay districts of these developments. And then what we would do would be that the county in the long term would be able to do the management of these things. But how we would do this would be that by having the overlay districts, if we can create a tax districts, which the county cannot do, but the towns, villages, and cities can. So this would be kind of a mutual partnership between the municipalities, so that the towns, villages, and cities we would operate and do it like we do with some of the roads and things for some of the towns right now. And then they would, in turn, we would build the towns, and the towns would attach that as a tax bill at every, as it's necessary to do it. And they could build sinking funds if they wanted, or they could just do it when it's necessary, they pay it. So it would be a matter of making some decisions on it, but I think it would, in the long run, as we continue to develop, we're gonna have more and more and more of this. And I just think it would be a better method to be able to have control over it where we don't have all the current problems. Even another issue that's come up in New Richmond, the city turned, some of the properties that were owned, they let go back on tax deed, and now the county received them, and the city has a mowing ordinance. Now all of a sudden the county's got to mow them, and we don't have any way to tax for that or to how to handle that back. So if we could come up with a plan that we could do the overlay districts, we can avoid all those types of issues for the future and have a better means to take care of it. So long story, but that's kind of what my reasoning is behind that.
Yeah, I will say that any amendments that we talked about at the June 11th work session, And that, we haven't forgot about them and that, but we haven't, as staff, had a chance to meet to go back and draft the provisions for like the special event camping and stuff. We still got those all, but we kinda had enough to go forward in that, so our zoning staff are in kind of the peak of their season, and we're trying to take and get ready for the move into the new suite, which is gonna happen towards the end of the month here, and so, that's kind of why, so I just wanted to make sure that the committee knew that we weren't wasting your time and that.
No.
We will be coming back and going through those provisions and that we talked about, and I have no problem going through and seeing about the airstrip layer and the, old landfill and the, stormwater layers, so, yep.
I think those are all really good ideas. I can especially relate to the HOA responsibilities for things like the stormwater runoff. As someone who was on a homeowners association for 6 years, it's a hellish business model, to be honest. I don't know any that are run the way you would run a business. But I know in the city of Hudson, a couple of years ago, we have new staff, and they went around identifying all of the stormwater runoff areas, and they found, funny thing, over time, a lot of those places that look, when you first start them, they're a little pond, and the next thing you know, they're cattails, and then it's just all solid. And so they had to go through and essentially redig up to restore a lot of them. And yeah, it costs money. And they are, at least in my new area that I live in, the city is coming through and mowing an area to try to limit the amount of silt that's going in there. But yeah, it's something, it just has to be done.
So I guess bringing this back, is everyone kind of in tune with exploring it? I mean, we don't have to make a decision on this tonight, but just looking at this as an alternative, because if we are thinking that this might be a possibility, the next ones we really need to talk to is the municipalities too, because this would end up being a partnership, because we can't afford to do this on our own. We need to have that taxing authority that they have, so we'd have to have a contractual arrangement with them and for them to understand why we need to do this. So just the one last thing, Jason, maybe could you just take a couple of minutes and go through what we had talked about on the enforcement thing and kind of what we're looking at on that for, because that is one of the number one things that we needed to work out. And you have a really good plan, but if you could take just a minute to share that with the other.
Correct. So I'm going to tie this into the ordinance, and that for the enforcement provisions of the ordinance and kind of going forward, just because then it's on our agenda for open meetings law. But currently, our ordinance talks about citation amounts and stuff. And in the near future, we're going to be having a new hire come on board. And so Jared Wayner left our department back in January, early February. And so I've been working with HR to kind of remold our land use technician role, and that to have the option, not only just for conservation and land use, but have a code enforcement. And so we extended the offer and that to a new hire that'll be based out of Baldwin, just because it's more centrally in the middle of the county, because that person's going to be covering the whole county. The goals of this new person are, one, to have one point of contact in that for all of our towns. Two, to take and remove permitting off their plate, because permitting automatically takes the priority because we have to issue permits within a certain amount of time. And so that will take and allow them to have their priority to be the compliance stuff. And then three is this is kind of to take and meet the county's strategic plan, the 2022 to 2025 plan underneath natural resources. One of the goals and objectives was to evaluate the amount of compliance cases that we're getting and the workload of the staff and try to take and figure out how to do it better. So that's kind of what we're looking at. We had that enforcement policy, and that's in a form of a PowerPoint that I shared with you last fall. It talks about the priorities of the code enforcement violations, you know, so that if we are at a point where we don't have any more staff capacity, but yet we get somebody that's pumping their sewer into the Kinnickinnick River, that's a higher priority. And so with that prioritization and that enforcement policy, I'd like to work on getting a forfeiture schedule. And so that would set the minimum forfeitures amount and that for common violations. And so that would also allow staff some discretion to be able to adjust the forfeiture amount for blatant violations. Most people know that they need to have their sewer pumped, you know, so if they're pumping it, they know that they're probably in the wrong there. They know that they probably shouldn't be pumping it into the water, you know, and that, so that's probably, you know, so to actually be able to increase citation amounts and that accordingly. And so we're very excited to try this new system, and there is a mix of some conservation duties as part of this new role as well, and so when we get into the enforcement section of the ordinance, we will be talking more about procedure and the forfeiture amounts, and so that would be the appropriate time to bring up a forfeiture schedule as well. So, any questions on that? So, and then I believe Supervisor Coner also brought up, so when we started, we accepted anonymous complaints, or when I came to the county, we accepted anonymous complaints, and that's really difficult for staff and that because it puts them in the bad spot because everything that we get is public record. And so it basically puts us into the position where we got to lie and that and say, well, yeah, we don't know who it is. But then if they file a request for any public documents and that we end up turning over the email complaint or whatever, and here all along, we obviously knew who it was. And so we are only accepting written complaints, and what Supervisor Coner mentioned to me earlier, and that was about taking and having complaints from the towns come through on official town letterhead, and that so that you know it's not the opinion of just one town supervisor, and that it is actually in that coming from the town board. Not saying that we won't follow up on all complaints and that, but then and that when we are working with the property owners and stuff, that will really help us engage with the towns more, because then we know that, hey, the town wants to know about this, we can copy them on all of our letters and correspondence and stuff and keep them updated. And with this whole compliance stuff as well, when we get down to that part of the ordinance, we want to look at our process and our workflow, because we've got a new software system that was actually purchased on that about 1.5 years, 2 years ago, and it's finally getting close to going live, and it's called Geo Permits, and that's got a whole compliance module workflow, and so that might just tweak a few things in the ordinance as well, so.
All right, we're going to close the business items for,
Can I just have one more thing? It's, I attended training that I think all of you already know based on your comments. It was called Zoning as a Tool to Protect Groundwater. So some of you have seen this. I'll pass it down to Supervisor Anderson, and if you feel that everyone else could benefit from seeing the latest materials, I'll be happy to send along the document.
yeah, I think we'll, if you want to forward it to the administrator, or the director, excuse me, and he can BCC everybody so we don't violate open meetings laws, that'd be awesome. Yep.
So there, what she's referring to, and that is some wellhead protection ordinances and some water quality ordinances And right now, it looks like there's quite a few counties around us that are adopting these ordinances, but they're kind of a standalone ordinance. And so I did reach out to Lynn Markham on that with Croix. And so I do have some example copies in that, but it looks like it might be something to partner with, you know, on that, either Chapter 15 or maybe the shoreline regs or something like that when we get to that point. If there's interest from the committee to have a whole new ordinance, so.
Yeah, that's one I would strongly support, and also just to have communities be aware to have future planning for where as their communities expand, where their future wellheads, and so that they can initially protect property before they even have their growth out into those areas. So, because there's so much ground that we have issues with right now, and we need to make sure that we're considering all that and protecting it up front.
Sounds good. I haven't reviewed it enough to speak that educated on it, you know, so, but I will consider digging into that and seeing if we can put something together or what the best approach would be, so.
Yeah, we can get into it more at a later time. Obviously, it's not on this agenda, right? All right, date of the next meeting is currently scheduled for the 23rd at 1. To be frank, we don't have anything that pressing that is going to be on the regular agenda, so I may be canceling it, but I'll let you know at least a week in advance.
I thought, did you send us an email that you had canceled? I thought for some reason in my mind, I took it off my calendar.
It's like
I jumped at
90%.
the
It's
chance.
90% canceled.
Oh,
but
okay, so I'll just
it's
put
not official
10%
yet. Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a world where we do it, but I don't see it being very likely at this point.
You let us know.
Yep.
Yeah, we're pretty much already past any public notifications and stuff deadlines, so, you know.
And with that, we're adjourned.